that we have Father Samuel as someone who has empowered our education, that we belong to a family where women count, where women are empowered, that women have a power to change the world because they believe in themselves. I have to say, and it's really true, as a Cincinnati Dominican, it happens my heart to be a part of that congregation of sisters. I know, I always thought all sisters were alike until I learned from other congregations. And I soon began to realize, no, they're not. How blessed am I? How blessed am I to have a God that guided my life toward the Cincinnati Dominicans. And how wonderful we all are to be a part of this experience and a part of this environment. We're doubly blessed today because we have an expert on Father Samuel with us. Tall and feel proud that you belong to a school that believes in you and believes you to be the best person so that you can change the world because you believe in yourself. So let's give it a hand to Sister Priscilla, who's an awesome educator.
When Father Samuel was 18 years old, raise your hand if you're 17 or 18 years old. Okay. And you've got this sense like you're counting the days. I know that. B, what's next? Maybe you've got your college, maybe you know where you're going, maybe you're not sure, maybe it's like I'm going, but oh my gosh, what does this mean? I'm leaving home. All the questions you have. You have to understand he had the same questions. And for some mysterious reason of God's grace, when he came home from school, he had been sent to boarding school in Switzerland, which wasn't far from where he grew up in Milan, which is in northern Italy. He told his father he wanted to join the Dominicans. He was 17 years old. And his father was like, are you kidding? No, that's the last thing. I want you to join the business. You're my youngest child. I'm a widower. And Samuel, for some reason, had a vision of who he wanted to be. And so at 18, he joined the Dominicans. When he was 21, he heard a speaker. And I have heard speakers who have changed my life and made me think a whole other way. He heard a speaker, a priest from America, who came saying, we are in desperate need of missionaries for the Native Americans, the Native peoples, and for all the immigrants that are coming into the United States. Will anyone think about this and come? One hand. Samuel Mazzuchelli. I'll go. He said he knew the minute he heard the question, that's what he was meant to do. So he left home. He thought forever. Spoke no English, had never been out of his home country, traveled first to France where he practiced French for about 2 months, saw all the beautiful sights, Notre Dame and Paris and everything, left from Le Havre, took a small ship, which if I'm right is probably the length or the width of this auditorium was the size of the ship he crossed the ocean on. There were only 35 passengers. He got to New York, spoke no English, thought it was the wildest place he'd ever seen. Probably still is if we went there. And that expression, the kindness of strangers, he gestured that he didn't have enough money to pay for the stagecoach. And this gentleman, who he never knew, never met again, paid his fare. So he traveled by stagecoach over the Allegheny Mountains, by riverboat, till he got to Cincinnati, Ohio. And that's where his journey is for his studies to be a priest. You might say, oh, great, that's an adventure. I like that. Well, next adventure, of all the priests, the 7 candidates who were ordained that year, Bishop Fenwick, I think you've heard that name before. Fenwick? Is that ring a bell? That's it. I thought you all or something. Okay. Well, Bishop Fenwick had a real connection with Father Mazzuchelli, this young priest. So he sent him to the parish north of Cincinnati. The parish north of Cincinnati was called the Michigan Territory. It was 60,000 square miles, larger than Italy, and he was the only priest. He was 23 years old. How did he get there? He traveled by himself. Now, he had a few years of English by this time, so he traveled by boat up Lake Michigan, all the way up to Mackinac Island, and that's where his first assignment was. And from there, he learned to travel by snowshoe. He learned to travel by canoe. He actually crossed Lake Michigan in an open boat to Green Bay every year. We're talking adventures here that are unbelievable. So I just want to tell you those stories because that tells you something about his character. Now, did he have a hard time? Absolutely. Did he have a lot of failures? Absolutely. But he always believed that this is what he was meant to do. By the time he served in the Upper Peninsula of Michigan and northern Wisconsin, and his dream was, and he was very successful with the Menominee and Ojibwa peoples. Andrew Jackson, who hated the Native Americans and wanted them removed, he even passed an act in Congress called the Indian Removal Act. They were all pushed to the west. And so his dream of the schools for the Native Americans didn't work out. So he came down the Fox River Valley to the Mississippi and traveled to what we call the tri-state area of northern Illinois, southwestern Wisconsin, and northeastern Iowa. And that's where we think of him most, because that's where, how many of you have been to the Mound? Raise your hand. Cincinnati. Anybody here? A few of you. Okay, you'll have to tell them how beautiful it is, right? So the Mound, which is, have you ever wondered why it's called the Mound? Yeah. I used to think that too until the first time I came there for a retreat. We pulled up to this four-way stop in the highway because it's in the country. And I said, oh my gosh, it really is a mound. It's just a big mound that rises on the horizon. It's a geologic formation in that part of the country. Well, Father Samuel thought it was the perfect place to start the Dominicans in the Midwest, on the frontier. And part of his vision was to invite women to become what we call active sisters. Sisters who weren't cloistered, whose ministry was not one of prayer all day, but sisters who went out and served the people. He wanted women, this is what he said, he wanted women from the area to serve the people of the area. So the first sisters, one was 16, one was 34. They were both they heard him preach. Wouldn't you have loved to have heard him preach? And it was because of his preaching that they answered his invitation. And he took those frontier women, most of them were daughters, some had been born in Ireland or Germany, those are the two most common immigrant groups. Some of them were American born, and he formed them with his vision of what that kind of service could mean. And so it's so important that, we have Father Samuel, and then we have his influence, which was far and wide, far beyond the sisters. But it's how he empowered them and then urged them to empower other young women. So I want to talk about these pictures for a minute. I know you can't all see them really well. This one right here is the formal portrait when the school opened in Benton, Wisconsin. Now, you live in this beautiful area, you're from Chicago, you're from all over, but you don't live in the country. Benton is right now a little town of 900 people. It has one main street. It has no stoplights. When Father Samuel built the school, it was probably 1,000 people. One main street, no stoplights. But it was a mining town. The streets were mud. There were poor houses. People had no money. You ever heard of the Wisconsin Badgers?
Yeah.
Okay, you know how they got their name? From the miners who dug holes in the hills and made caves to sleep in when they were working in the mines. And it was a derogatory term, those Badgers. That's how they got their name. They were miners who literally carved out a space inside the hills to sleep when they were mining. So this is the kind of town we're talking about. And yet he built this beautiful building. We know he was an architect. And here's a picture, and the sister, now we'll let you come up and look at these later, but this was he was so excited. St. Clara Female Academy, which sounds funny to us, but that was its official title. And, okay, we're in the middle of southwestern, Wisconsin wasn't a state yet. This is now the Wisconsin Territory. The train did go from Chicago to Dubuque, and Chicago to Galena. And then you had to take a carriage or an ox cart from Galena or Dubuque to this little town. There were students from 10 states. We have the student roster. Tennessee, Illinois, Massachusetts, Minnesota, and of course Iowa, Wisconsin, the territory, Michigan, St. Louis, because of his reputation. And, as Emily and Aaron said, because of the vision he had of education for women. One of the lines that we know he told his sisters was, and I want you to think about Trinity when I say this to you, he told the sisters, make school as much like home as possible. He allowed no physical discipline in an era when being spanked or hit caned was very common. He allowed no argument of religion. Every school he opened, and this was true for the academy, was open to young girls and women of all faiths. And one of his rules was no arguing, no saying, mine's better, etc. He wanted them to think on their feet and to think for themselves. So he wrote debates, and they had to do public speaking. And I said, in an era when it was not even permissible in some places for women to speak in public. One of the topics that we know he asked them to debate, and this would have been something the seniors would have had to do, was the question of women's suffrage. This was 1854. When was the amendment passed that allowed women to vote in this country? 1922. 23? Whatever. But we're talking how many years difference. That was a question he believed. I'm sure he thought they should have had the right to vote already. Why would he ask them to publicly debate the merits of women's suffrage? They debated the question of the Civil War. It was a great party. He had students from the South. Catholic students from the South. Some of their parents sent them north to school because they saw what was going to happen. And time, okay. And so, one of the debates, he made the girls from the South take the abolitionist position, and the girls from the North argued pro-slavery. And he wrote that the reason he did that was so they could stand in each other's shoes and have a sense of what the other side was thinking. And this is a remarkable thing. How many of us would be willing to, unless we're on a debate team, to take the other side? But that's the kind of gift he gave the sisters and the students. A love of learning, a desire for excellence in teaching, and that drive to be the very best person. That all the gifts and all the talents that women brought to the world were to be brought to the world and not hidden. So he did that for the sisters, and we hope in the 165 years that we have been a congregation, that we have done that with all the students we've taught. That's been our goal anyway. Maybe not achieved in every way perfectly, but that's who we are. We're his daughters in a way, and all of you are here at Trinity, and absolutely right, the school would not be here if it had not been for Samuel Mazzuchelli. So, in his name, I thank you for your hospitality and encourage you to be the kind of young woman that he envisioned for the world. Thank you.